Okay, welcome to session 4 of Sugar Night Scorch. We're halfway through, so congratulations. And now I think is when we get started on what I consider the more interesting part of the course. So that's exciting. We'll jump right in. So yeah, Discord, if you haven't joined that yet, links here. You guys can get help there on your submissions for things when you're working on them through the week, and ask just general questions as well. And then groups here, some information on how to do that. And some more information. Yeah, again, if you guys need these slides, you can go to the Sugar Night website, and all the slides will be there under the Scorch tab. And that's also where you submit your exercises. So today we're going to look at JavaScript and just do a brief overview of JavaScript coding. We touched on it last time, but we'll kind of go more into it this time. And we'll look at packages for JavaScript, and then also just how to develop a site and more like top level stuff of what developing a site looks like for in industry and like when you're making something for yourself as well. Yeah, so again, Sugar Night slides and files are all there. But then if you guys want the exercise files, this is the GitHub. And if you don't know how to download, you can ask your mentors in the breakout rooms how to download those if you haven't done that still. Okay, we're going to start off with a quick question. It gives you some code and 3 options, and you just have to choose which option that this code will make. So I'll open that up. Okay, so in this case, the answer was B. And we know that because we have the 3 columns in this class row on the top, and then the 2 columns using the bootstrapping columns right here on the bottom. So just a refresher, we did touch on JavaScript last time, but just an overview of what JavaScript is. So it's a scripting language, same as Python. That means it's not compiled. So then the interpreter, it uses an interpreter and it goes through line by line, and that's how it executes it. It lets you run code once the page is loaded. So we've done HTML and CSS, and then now JavaScript lets us run actual code on a website. So we focus on how to make the page look how we want it to, and then now we don't know like how to do stuff on the page. And that's where JavaScript comes in. It lets you interact with the web page itself, and that's called the DOM, or the document object model. And then it lets you manipulate things on the page. JavaScript is its own language, and you can put it in a script tag, or you can have a separate file as your JavaScript. And we'll see how to do that later on. So just some syntax. Again, we end lines with this semicolon. You don't need to, again, it won't give you an error. It'll still work, but you should. And then like most languages, I know most of you guys came from Python, which is indentation. We don't actually need indentation here. We use these curly braces. And that's the same with most other languages. Python's weird in that way that use indentation. But we can use these curly braces to define like code blocks. So we put functions in these. So this function greet, everything in between these curly braces. It is indented in this case, but it doesn't have to be. It makes it easier to read. Squiggles, yeah. So here, braces, curly braces. I call them curly braces. These slides call them squiggles. Mostly they're called curly braces. So yeah, here's your Python on the left, and then equivalent JavaScript on the right. So data types, again, this is a weakly typed language, which means we can just do something like this with string equals high, and we don't have to say this is a string. So we could say age for integer equals whatever age is, and we don't have to say age integer like in most languages. It's the same thing in Python. So in Python, you could just do name equals your name. You didn't have to specify that as a string. Just going over the data type, string is a word or characters. So all of these things that are red are strings. Integers are numbers that are not decimals. Booleans, true and false. JSON is like an object or a dictionary in your Python. And that would be the JSON here. So here's your key, the name, and then your value, Kieran, and then age, key, 23 is your value. Array is like your lists. And then there's more. That's not all of the data types. You can convert from things. Parse in is one way to do it. If you guys want to find out how to convert to something, you just look up JavaScript string to int conversion, and it'll give it to you. Loops. There's again for loops, while loops. Yeah, right here we can see that. Same kind of thing from Python. If you carry over a lot of your intuition from Python over to JavaScript, you just have to change some details and the syntax. For each is something that's new in JavaScript. It's very nice for looping through something like an array. So shopping list is an array. We see up here it has eggs, ham, and spam. And then if we want to, instead of doing like for range in whatever, or for, and then looping through the length of the array, we can just do this for each, and it makes it a lot easier to do. So we do array dot for each, and then your item is the iterable of that list. So in this case, item will be eggs the first time through, and then ham the second time through, and spam the third time through. So this code here, and then this console.log, we haven't touched on that. That's your print statement. And I'll show you an example of that once we get to that. But yeah, array for each, and then item, this will print out eggs, ham, and spam because it's looping through that array. Yeah, and then we see up here, we can still do the for loops, but this just makes it easier for us. Yeah, if assuming you guys are using VS Code, you probably are. It's really easy because it does this autocomplete thing for you. So if you do array dot and then start typing it, you can just click tab or enter, and then it'll fill it in for you, and it makes it pretty easy. And then also, if you forget, you can just look things up as well. So comparisons, these are again from Python. If you want to check if two things are equal to something, so in these if statements, then you can put the conditionals there. So if x is equal to 8, then if x is equal to 8, it'll return true, and it'll go into that conditional. And again, we see that these are defined by the curly braces and not the indentation. So the same way that the loops were and the functions were, we're using those curly braces again here. And for equals, you have to be careful because 1 equal sign is an assignment. So that's going to set x equal to 5. And 2 equal sign is a true or false. JavaScript has this weird thing with the 3 equal signs, and that's going to check your type. So technically, if you look at this line here, this 5, which is an integer, is equal to this 5, which is a string. This is going to return true in JavaScript. But if you have the 3 equal sign, that's going to return false. If you forget, you can always come to these slides or look it up. This is something that it's a pretty niche topic. And a lot of times you usually don't really care what type it is, but if you do care, then you want these 3 equal signs. And if you're not sure, I'd say use the 3 equal signs, but you can also, it depends on what you're trying to do with your site. Yeah, and examples can be found on the GitHub on this link. Functions. So instead of doing def function, we're going to do function is our function keyword. So that we just write this to say we're about to define a function. And then we have the function name. So function print something, and then here are arguments. Again, these intuitions like this are the same as in Python, they're just written differently in JavaScript. So function keyword, function name, arguments, curly braces again, and then you have whatever you want in your function. So here we're just returning the two things. But you can have like loops and all that good stuff and math and these comparison operators in your function. This is where JavaScript really converges from all other languages, and that's the fact that it's used for web development because you can access these things on the page. So the document object in the next slide is a good example. So we'll go there. Yeah, the window is the whole thing. If you want to edit something that the browser is doing, that's window, and then the actual page is your document. These links will go to some documentation for that, and you can just look these up. These are objects, so they're like dictionaries, and they have a ton of different elements that we could never cover. So you can just look them up. And also, I wonder if they have it here. Yeah, so window.location, we learned that console.log thing. So here, this console.log, we can just print out, this is our print statement, if you remember, and we just print out our window. So if I do window dot, we'll just print out window actually. And we will go and look at what that looks like. So yeah, we get this printing again. So how you get to this console is you right click, hit inspect, and hit console, and that's where you'll get all the print statements. If we look at window, it's huge. It has everything we could ever want to edit. And so yeah, again, you look at the documentation, you find out things that you want to edit, and then that's what you edit. You don't have to read through everything here in order to be like a good web developer. These are just things you look up. So yeah, location, URL, and you can change the URL using this. So with the object, you can have an assignment operator in order to push things to the object to edit it. So this would bring you to google.com. Screen size, we can make the screen size bigger or smaller with the window again. So here we see window inner height equals document height, and we can extract the information from the window object. And here's just some documentation about what you can use it for. Again, there's way too much stuff for anyone to know off the top of their head, and it's software, so it gets updated all the time. So these are things you just want to go to the documentation for. Element. So we're going to look at the document object now instead of the window. The window is the screen, document is the actual page. This is where all your HTML is. So when you put, like, if you remember, you put those tags in, you put H1 tag or P tag. This is the document object is where all those are sitting. And that's why it's called the DOM, the document object model. So we can do document get elements by ID. And if you remember, your ID is a hashtag. So on this button, if I want to put an ID, it's hashtag and CSS. I messed that up. We can do ID and we can do button. And then now this button will have an ID of ID of button. So now if we want to grab that button and do something to it, we can say get element by ID and then pass in button, and then we can do different things. So again, this is an object, and you can print those out and look at the documentation for that. You can do document get element ID dot button and change something about it. Whatever you guys need to do to your site will be available to you through that. We can also get them by class name. So if we do class equals, and then we have all the buttons on the page be in the class of buttons, we can grab all those at once and then have access to them through this function call here. Get elements by name. So this is going to get all the div elements. We can get all the anchor tags we can get all the P elements, whatever you guys want here. And then by name. So it's going to have name equals age. I've never used the name ones, both of these. Usually ID and class name are what are more common, but if you need to use them, they're there for you. Yeah, so headline tag name, we can use the IDs as our variable names. and just access them directly like this as well. Yeah, so again, each one of these are objects and they all have their different fields, and we can go and edit those fields. So if we want this element that we got from the ID, this hello world h1 tag, we can get, these are the important ones kind of in that object, the tag name, so h1, the inner text, it's going to strip away these HTML tags and just give you the text. So it's going to give you hello world without this anchor tag. And then if you want that anchor tag, you can hit .inner HTML and it'll also return that. So right now we're just grabbing those things. We can also set those things. So we can set the inner HTML to goodbye world, and then on your page, it will update. So right, like when you load in the page, it'll be hello world. The JavaScript interpreter will run through this code. It'll grab that element and it'll switch the HTML tag. So it'll show up as goodbye world. And then if you grab it later, obviously, if you grab the inner text, it'll be different because you changed it in this line up here. So the geometry document object model, that's just your whole document. It's your page that you've developed. We have the root at the top, so it's body, and then we have everything goes down from there. That's why it's called a tree, because the body is like the main part of the tree, and then there's divs. In this case, div h1p are all of those things, are the children of that body, and the body is its ancestor, is what we call it. So the body has one child, which is div. The div has two children here, and then the p tag has one child. It's just everything's nested, and everything has parents and children. And the reason we care about this is that we can access these things through these relationships. So we can access the parent elements from this div, or main text parent element. We can access that div there. And we can go up and down through these parent elements, and siblings here. And children as well will give us an array that we can loop through using this. If you remember from Python, an array, if you have 5 things in the array, it starts at 0. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the same thing in JavaScript. So if you want the first thing in an array, you need index 0. And if you need like the 5th item in an array, that's actually 4. That's actually index 4. So yeah, we're going to go do an exercise. Starter code is here on the GitHub, and you can start coding off of that. And you just want to make this button change the text from hello world to goodbye world. So we will open up those rooms, and you guys can go and work on that. All right, I think everyone's back. Again, I just want to go like reiterate that these exercises are for you guys to learn. So if you didn't totally complete everything in that time, but you got to play around with it and learn a little bit more about it, that's really the main goal. So don't worry if you didn't totally finish the exercise. I do also want to point out there's a hidden slide in the slide deck that you guys can still access, and it has this other exercise that I think would be helpful if you want to kind of expand on that JavaScript knowledge and just looking at like basic coding in JavaScript. So yeah, these attributes, moving on to this attributes for this content, we can put these attributes in. If you remember, the attributes are in like a p tag, we'd have the curly braces. Here, I'll show you the curly braces, and then or a button. Here, let's do a p tag. We have these curly braces, and we can put attributes, and those are going here. So that would be like a class is going to be an attribute, and we can have this as text. Whoops, text. There you go. So yeah, this text, anything in these tags is an attribute, and we can access those through JavaScript as well. And we can set attributes and get the attributes that these tags have. We can also set styles. So this is your CSS. We can set the color to red, for example, and font size, whatever. We can set the CSS through JavaScript. Here's some creating document objects. This is useful in some contexts, but usually you can get around doing this by just having stuff hidden. But if you want like a note, like a task making app, for example, you have a field and you put a task in there, and we can enter. It makes like a list of all the tasks you have to do. This would be a good example of where you want to use that. So you want to create these task elements, and this is a guide to how to do that. You can also make pages full screen. You've probably seen this like on a YouTube video where you make it full screen, it covers your whole screen. there's ways to do that through the document and window model as well. Okay, so we know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, those are kind of 3 building blocks. Now we can make sites. So we're going to be working on this project for like a blog sort of thing where you can put code into a text editor and then export it as an HTML for your blog post. And we're going to do that through using this JavaScript package. So right now we've been using the script tag in our HTML file and just putting JavaScript straight into our HTML file. I also said at the beginning, there's a way to do this in a .js file. So instead of putting this in your HTML, you can have an external file with all your JavaScript in it. This just makes it easier to split the code up and it makes it easier to read. So we have one and we actually provided it to you, this filtering system in the GitHub. I'm in my GitHub right now in exercises. It's right here in filtering, this filtering.js file. And this is an external .js file. And we can use it through our HTML. Yeah. Oh, so this one actually, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So yeah, we can use that in our HTML file. Yeah, like this script. And then instead of putting our JavaScript in between these square braces, in between the script tags, we can just call it and say, instead of putting here, I'm just going to tell you where it is. And this is where it is. So this is your path. This says in my current folder, and it's a file called filtering.js. If you need help, this is something that you can look up or ask your mentors in breakout rooms or in the Discord. Yeah. So I'm not the author, but I'm not sure if the author is here yet. Yeah, he's not here yet. Kieran, I think, made this. But he also added some documentation into the GitHub. So if you go, there's some documentation right here in a markdown file. So if you need to read about this JavaScript file, you can just go to the documentation. If you are using external things, so someone you didn't know made it, try to use documentation. Yeah, so always pick projects with documentation. It just makes it easier. As a software developer, you want to get good at reading code, but if you don't have to, that's always nice because reading documentation, they'll tell you what functions you have access to and how to use those functions. And that just makes it a lot easier. Another thing is usually you want to pick tasks and build projects around those tasks and use like external projects for that task. You don't want to build a project around someone else's project. It's just easier to do that way. And then examples, you can just Google, if it's a popular one, you can just Google project name examples, and usually there'll be like GitHub or Stack Overflow links. You can just go and you can see how other people have used it and how you could possibly use it in your project. So we're going to jump into another exercise. There's starter files under this link, and you're going to have this blog thing, and you're just going to do the filtering with that external resource that we provide to you here. So we're going to shoot you into the breaker rooms. You can work on that. Okay, sweet. So yeah, hopefully you got that figured out. You can go back and check it on the next breaker room, or you can go back in your own time and finish that up if you didn't get to. So we're downloading these or like using these scripts that we had put into our folders. And if you wanted to do this for other people's packages, like how we were doing this, you would have to download all those files, put them into your file, like your project, and import them all using that script or like an import statement. An easier way to do this is to use a package manager. So in Python, we had pip. If you remember installing anything, you do pip install and then the package name. For JavaScript, we call that npm. And that just kind of does it for us. Yeah, but yeah, npm node package manager. It kind of helps out with JavaScript nodes. It's the pip for JavaScript. And then here are some resources you can look at npm. And if you know how pip works, it's easy. It again just downloads things for you and manages. It's what it sounds like. It manages packages. Usually on these smaller projects, we don't want to use npm. It has a lot of overhead, and it's kind of overkill for these smaller ones. So if we want to do some, like just a few different things, we can like download the JavaScript files like we were doing, or we can use CDNs. We talked about CDNs a little while ago when we were downloading Bootstrap. So we put that link in our head of our HTML, and then we could use Bootstrap in our site. If you remember, I forgot to put the link in the top when I was using Bootstrap when I was showing you guys how to work it, and it didn't work. This is just going to a server and pulling files from it. So if you can, like, if you're tracking here, and you can probably guess that we can use these to also get, instead of CSS files, we can get JavaScript files from these CDNs. It's just a lot easier to use than an NPM package, and some of them are even NPM compatible. So you can use NPM and these CDNs together, and just like it makes it easier for downloading smaller things for a smaller project. Sometimes downloading other people's code obviously comes with these security vulnerabilities. So there's a blog post here about how to manage those. If you're just making a small site and you're not storing any like user information, you don't really have to worry about them, but it's always something to keep in mind when you're developing and when you're developing and you plan on deploying that website. Okay, so we're talking a lot about code and using other people's code, but now we want to code. So yeah, learning libraries from like your whole coding journey, most of what you've probably been doing is writing your own code. And a lot of your like software development time has been spent actually writing code. As soon as you start to get bigger projects, you want to use other people's code because it's well maintained, it's well built, and just makes stuff easier usually. And as you use more of other people's codes, you're going to find yourself reading a lot more than writing code. Usually not more so actually, but more so than you've been doing so far. So one good way to do it is the docs of whoever made that. You can also look at YouTube video, blog posts. You can just Google examples, and there'll be usually people, if it's a popular library, you can find other people who have used it and see how they did it. And like you guys are all pretty internet savvy, and you can find things out any way that really works for you. So one thing that we can use is this highlight.js, and if you've probably seen when looking up code on websites that the code is highlighted as it would be in VS Code. So in VS Code, when you have like functions or strings or whatever, then it'll color them different ways, so then you can read them easier. And highlight.js just does that, but on a browser. So we could do this with CSS, but it would get kind of messy. Like for this, in this case, we'd have to color from differently than easy, preezy, and then differently than this core, differently than import, and we'd have to do the background and this, and that just makes it harder to do. So highlight.js kind of does that all for us in a nice, easy package. So this is your CDN. So you're going to put this CDN into your code like a script. And I do believe if you have exercises, there is highlight.js. So the exercise here, we can see that it's getting the script from a CDN here. And that's just how, that's how to download highlight.js into your file. So yeah, installing a page again here, we're using the CDNs to get those files. And that is in this HTML here, this file is going to be the same as what I showed you on my VS Code. How to add code. So code class language Python. This just tells me that the code in between these code blocks is going to be Python. Oops. And that will just highlight it in a way that highlight would like highlight these words. If you had like language JavaScript, it would just look and treat it as JavaScript. Yeah, and use these code blocks. And then put your code in there, just like normal HTML like blocks, but this time it's just code. So activate highlightings, we want to use this HLJS, highlight JavaScript, highlight all in our JavaScript. So that's just how we can toggle like on or highlighting in our website. Yeah, it activates the highlighting. So yeah, without it, it won't be highlighted. But then once we do that in our JavaScript, it'll like go through it for us. Yeah, so we're explaining about writing code. How is it supposed to know what is code and what is a representation of code? We can use these greater than and less than. So if we have HTML in our, like we're trying to show HTML, but we don't want it to actually read as HTML. Like if we, over here, if we had language-html and then we wanted to have like a p tag, it will read that as a p tag unless we have this and lt comma. So this lt is less than and greater than, and that just makes it so then we can do this less than p greater than hello world, and this will show up in our code, on our site as those less than and greater than signs. And that just avoids the browser from being confused over text and HTML code. Yeah, so here's the exercise. We're going to go in and we're going to use this. The CDN, I think, is already there for you. So all you have to do is actually go in and implement it into your site. So I'll pop you into breakout rooms and you can work on that. All right, cool. So moving on, we're gonna look, so you can change themes and languages. Here's some examples. So VS Code 2015, a little bit old, but you can do that if you want, and you can just change how things show up on the page. It's a pretty powerful editor, external project that you can import and use, and you can play around. Like documentation, again, is probably the best way to look through what it can do and find out how to do all this stuff, but you can also look up examples and anywhere else. So adding layer support, you can add things that like you can add personally add language support. So this is assembly language support. Assembly is just what runs very basic, like really low level. It's under C if you know what that is. And this is just how to do that. So taking user input, yeah, you can take user input and then we want to be able to use that in a form and output that and use whatever user inputs to use it as like data and like however you guys want to put that into your project. So one way to do that is HTML forms. These are pretty bare bones though. They work for basic cases, but there are better ways to do this. So in this GIF here, we see you're putting into a form, name, email, and some text. And then when you hit submit, it'll just print out what's there. So hitting submit, it'll just grab those things and print them out in a console.log. So yeah, examples, there's one on the Ignite website and then this Canadian coding. You've seen these before. And this is a way to do it without an external library because HTML has this built-in functionality, but it's all plain text. So we can't have, you'll see what I mean by this, like when we look into alternative to this, but it's all plain text. It's all just strings. They can be a little bit weird in how they process data. So sometimes you won't get back what you're expecting. And it's a little bit weird around that. And then very long content, it's not super great. So it's good for filling in things like names and emails and other things that you would use like normally on a website, like addresses if you're shipping something or whatever. But if you're using something longer, like an essay or a blog post, it just doesn't really work for that. So we're going to look at WYSIWYGs, or what you see is what you get. And that's just, we put things in to a text box and then it'll output as HTML. You can imagine this like on a Google Doc, you can make things bold and you can make things header and you can make things underlined. And we have that functionality on our web page, and then we can export it as an HTML document. So yeah, here's some editor types. There's, yeah, single pane. This is just some documentation you can look over. That's some external resources. Single pane, classic WYSIWYG, these are things, yeah, so Reddit, Slack, and Medium use these. And they have this like inline stuff, or you can have this header part, and there's just some resources around what these other sites are using. Forums, WYSIWYGs can do forums, so we can have a text area with different elements to edit it and things like that. And then document-based, this is like I was talking about. Yeah, exactly. Google Forms, we can you can export this as an HTML document. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, maybe not. But I think you can. But this is another WYSIWYG, and you've all used Google Docs before. Block-based. Here's a block. These are all, yeah, the green tags are just resources. That's why I'm kind of skimming over these and not going into them. But yeah, here's an example of WYSIWYG. We save it, and there's an HTML file that will show you, again, what you see is what you get. So what you see that you put in is what you're going to get out of that WYSIWYG. So we're going to be using one, and we're going to be using one called the Medium Editor, and that just helps. We can bold and underline things. This is an external project again, so there's those ways to import it. And this documentation will tell you how to import it. You can download it, like I said, and put the JavaScript and files and CSS files into your project and just get them normally like you would any other file, or you can use a CDN. In this case, you guys can choose what's easiest for you, or if you want to challenge yourself, what's harder for you. So if you want to learn something, if you don't know CDNs and you want to learn CDNs, I recommend doing that. And then setting stuff up. So you can do a div class editable, and then your editor is just going to be inside of that class using this medium editor. But again, you need the medium editor files somewhere in your system. You just somehow how to get those, and you can get those using this documentation here. So we're going to jump right into an exercise using that. Here's the documentation again, and we just want you to have make a page where this medium editor is working. So we're going to shoot you into your break rooms. You can work on that. All right, cool. Next up, so we customize editors. There's kind of three main ways you can do that. There's that toolbar at the top, like with the bold and the headers. We can edit that. We can add functionality, or we can take away things that we don't think are important. Setting themes. Dark mode, again, always the best, but we can set up different themes for how we want it to look to fit our site theme. So it's not just this big white box that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb on our site. And we can add different plugins and extensions to expand on what it can do. Modifying it. Yeah, so buttons here, our toolbar. We're going to use these different bold, italic, underline. We can put these, add these in and out based on what we want. And we put those as our editor config into this object. We use these curly braces for that. And then we can pass that in when we create the editor, we can pass those in as an argument to the constructor here on the medium editor. So like earlier, we just had .editable, and then now we can add in these configurations. Setting a theme, we can put these CSS files into from the CDN, and you can find those on the GitHub, and you can edit how it looks through that. Extensions, so there's again this documentation for different things you can add to your WYSIWYG. And you can put those into your medium editor to expand it based on what the functionality is. Yeah, so more extensions. You need to put those again into your extensions config, and you pass those in the same way that you put the toolbar config in here. Yeah, so relying on third-party codes is nice because other people made it for you, so you can kind of rely on them, but you need to trust that they made it correctly. So there's trade-offs for whether you want to use someone else's code or not, and you have to balance whether making it yourself is easier than using someone else's code. So grabbing the data, we can just, it's really easy. You do editor.get content, and it'll grab that. So yeah. And we can use those on button click. We have the button on click save content. In my last one, I didn't really go over this, but I had that in my demo. I had that button on click, and that's how I printed out the window at the start of the class. So if you have a button just calling JavaScript functions, you just put it in here. You just put the name of the function, and it'll call that. And you need these, if it's a function, you need these curly braces here. So saving files, we're just going to save as a blob. A blob is kind of a generalized terms for just a file. And that's how we're going to use this. So we're going to save the blob as this text, and this HTML is, I believe we get from the get content. Yeah, editor get content. And then, yeah, we'll put that in there and save it as a blob so we can save it as a file. And then, yeah, so we're going to go into this file saver.js, and we're just going to use this, what we made in the last exercise, and make this and spin it off so you can save your own HTML file. So put it into break rooms, and you guys can work on that. All right. So just like a little extension off of using that. So when we export that, we can add some wrapper HTML. So then if you have whatever you have, we can style some things around it. Just like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but if we want like a wrapper and then say this is your content in the middle and have like a nice background or something, we can do that using these this HTML here. So, or like, sorry, string in JavaScript, and we can just put the title and the user HTML in here. So this red stuff is the stuff we made, and it'll just be wrapped, and we can put some other HTML in here as well. So there's a few slides here over like problems with HTML generation. Biggest thing is the security. We have a session on security later in the session, so I'm gonna kind of skip through these ones, but we'll learn more about it later. And again, you can come back and check these slides out. So yeah, there's just some more stuff. Yeah, so sorry, I wanted to touch on these. These are some other things. We used the medium editor and for that one. But these are some other things we can use for visualization, for making charts and stuff like that. And then games, some of them are the same as the other ones, but you put games in browsers. And it just easier to run games on browser. And it's kind of cool to like make games and be able to run them in Chrome or whatever. Okay, so different parts of the site. We're going to kind of diverge from what we've been talking about, and we're going to talk about web development as a whole and a little bit more of an umbrella, what it takes to build a site and what different sections of the site are. Front end. I just want to preface this. So front end is different than client side, and back end is different than server side. Front end just means anything you see, kind of. So most of that, like HTML, CSS, and then JavaScript is part of that too. And that's things that show up in front of you. Yeah, everything we've done so far is front end. You can do this without JavaScript, but JavaScript is there to help you out. As you've seen, you can make sites without JavaScript, but you've probably seen how useful it can be. But then if we want to save things, like if you have a login system or if you have some data you want to persist, or like a store like Amazon would have, they just don't have a front end. They also have stuff in the back end. So that is everything that's running behind the scenes data. And that's so like, again, this is different than server side because client side is what's running on your machine, on your computer, and server side is what's running on a server. Usually they're the same, but they can be different as well. So back end is, yeah, databases and networking. This is all the stuff you don't really see, but that goes on behind the scenes. So the back end for an Amazon, for example, would be it sends something to a warehouse, and then that warehouse, like the sending is in the backend, and then it'll track your inventory of the item you just bought on some database somewhere. That would be backend as well. So we haven't touched on that yet, but we'll talk about that later in later sessions. Yeah, front end loads on browser, and then that's all this stuff. So stuff you can see, but also like the local storage, which I don't think we touched on, but that's part of the front end. And then back end is authentication, which is like logging in, networking. Complex processing would be like if you need a machine learning model in the back end, for example, like on Instagram, the way it provides things to you, like the discovery page, I guess, is not done on your computer. It's done on a backend on a server somewhere. And you can run any language. So Python would be backend language, and I think that's what we're using in this course. So yeah, we'll cover backend in later sessions. They interact. Yeah, so they're different, and usually interact through something called APIs, and we'll cover that again. But they're usually going to interact with each other through these interfaces, so you can put data through them and requests between them. So there's a few different ways we can develop a site. Yeah. So there's like, well, I'm just going to jump right into it. Actually, there's static sites. This is kind of what we've been doing so far. The backend does bare minimum, or sometimes it doesn't even have a backend. And it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it's just to provide information or to like show you something. So this usually doesn't include something where you can log in. But the really good part about this is they're almost always free in order to host them. So you can put a site up and put it on something, and it's usually free to just put these files up, because all you're doing with this is when you search up that site in a browser, it's going to go grab those HTML, CSS files, and it's just going to grab them once, shift them over to your computer, and run them. So that's why they're free, because they're pretty easy to host. So yeah, everything we've done, again, is front end and static sites, but now there's only so much you can do with that. So in our next sessions, Kieran's actually going to be leading the second half. I'm going to take one of them, but most of it's going to be Kieran, and he's going to teach you guys how to add functionality to the backend and add like a deeper web development, so you can provide more functionality to end users. So yeah, here's an optional exercise you guys can look at, and there's some starter code for you there. The end of session exercises. So you guys are going to be making these blog things. We covered this a little bit in some exercises, but you're going to be doing kind of a full site with these. Level 2 is a personal site, and you can use these libraries to make cool things like code blocks so you can drop some of the code you made, or whatever. And then level 3 is this WYSIWYG and the file exporter, and you're going to be doing a project around that. So I don't know if this is still, is this still a thing? Is this added? And
Yeah,
is
so
okay.
this is a event that's gonna take place so in April 12th to 14th. So it's a game jam that we're inviting all the mentees to participate. So there's no theme to the game that we'll be designing. It's pretty free reign, whatever you guys want. Yeah, so if you guys are interested to read more information or want to sign up, just click the link or use the QR code on the slide here. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Fanny. So yeah, this would be something that would be cool to make your own project. And then also we covered in one of those resource slides some games you can make on the web. So if you want to do that, that'd also be something you could do. So that's it from me. We're gonna put you in the break rooms though, so you can work on these exercises. And then once you're done in those break rooms, you're free to go. Thank you for coming. And we'll see you next week where Kieran will do some backend stuff.